Hello and welcome to ENC 1101 Productions, the podcast where we explore the secrets and powers of reading and writing. I'm your host, Professor Smith, the professor who's crazy about anything and everything English related. I'm excited to dive into tonight's podcast, but first I want to welcome our special guest to everyone. Our special guest is a fellow student of mine who's very passionate about English and literature as a whole. Can I welcome to you my student, Stephen Browning.
Hello, Professor. Thank you for having me on tonight.
And hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Browning. I'm a freshman attending UCF right now. I have Professor Smith for ENC 1101, and I'll be seeing what Professor has to discuss with me today. So, Professor, what did you want to talk about with me today? Well, Stephen, I wanted to use your help to explore what literary sponsors are to our audience, since we've discussed it in my class before.
Oh yeah, I remember talking about literary sponsors.
Okay, good. I hope you'd remember. Well, for our viewers back at home who do not know what literary sponsors are, a literary sponsor, as defined by Dr. Brandt, is any agents, local or distant, that enable, support, teach, model, as well as recruit and regulate, suppress, or withhold literacy and gain advantage by it in some way. So, just to clarify for you, Professor, literary sponsors are people like teachers who give literacy knowledge for their benefit of gaining advantage, such as money or looking good for their boss. Yes, Stephen, that's exactly right. People like teachers would be considered literacy sponsors as they're gaining advantage by giving you help in literacy, such as they're gaining money or they're getting a good word in for their boss, etc. Now, I want to tell you, Stephen, and the viewers on the ENC 1101 Productions podcast about an article called Sponsors of Literacy by Dr. Brandt. This article, I like it a lot because it describes how literary sponsors can positively or negatively affect you depending on how good your literacy sponsors were growing up.
Oh, okay. Seems interesting. What's the story?
So the story is about a study done to see the impact of literacy sponsors on people. They observed two people named Raymond Branch and Dora Lopez, and they observed these two people over a good brief period of time to see their literacy sponsors and how good their English skills were. And when observing, they found Raymond was born into a wealthy family and had very educated parents, such as dad was a professor at Caltech, and Raymond, coming from a wealthy family, was able to have good access to very good technology, such as computers, and like calculators, etc. And he also had good access to books and education, as his dad worked at Caltech, and they were able to pay for like tutors and have him get help at the university, study at the university's library, and etc. And because of all these literacy sponsors, Raymond had, from such an early age till like where he is now as an adult, had very high level English / like literacy skills. But on the contrary, Dora, she had little to no access to literary sponsors like Raymond, as she came from a very low income, poor family, and lived in an area where they didn't really have access to things such as computers or libraries and stuff. So in the libraries and books they did have, there were old or out of edition and not in the best state. So because she had little to no access to these literary sponsors, in return, her English / literature skills were also very low leveled. And they got better as she got older, because then she started studying at university and was able to up her literature skills. But because she had access to these bad or little to no access to literary sponsors, it affected her literature skills greatly.
That's an interesting story. It really puts into perspective how important having good or bad literacy sponsors, such as teachers or education or technology, can really have on a person's literacy skills.
Well, Stephen, if it's alright with you, I'd like to ask you some questions about you and literary sponsors before you leave.
Yeah, sure, no problem.
Cool. So, Do you have a story or experience of having positive or negative literacy sponsors like Dora or Raymond did?
I would say I've had very good literature sponsors throughout my time in life for the most part. If I had to say my best literacy sponsor, it'd definitely be my fourth grade teacher. So, fun fact, back in third grade, I almost failed school because I failed the FSA reading exam, which is the statewide reading exam all students have to take. And I failed it because, well, I didn't know how to read. And luckily I was able to retake it, and I somehow scored high enough to pass and go into fourth grade. But the fact still remained is I didn't know how to read. And I didn't know how to read because it wasn't because I was dumb or anything. I didn't know how to read because all the other ways I was taught how to read didn't make sense to me and didn't process my brain correctly for me to understand it correctly. So my fourth grade teacher, my parents and I all had a meeting before the school year, and she told me that she was going to teach me how to read and make me into a good reader. And so I worked with her every day before and after school with reading practices and just literature practice just in general. And by the end of the school year, I took a reading test, and my reading level was at that of a sixth grader. So in 1 year, from going from not knowing how to read to 1 year of working hard every day and learning in a different way that I wasn't used to, I went to that at a reading level of sixth grade just because I had good access to literacy sponsors such as my fourth grade teacher that showed me the correct way of how to learn certain things in English that made sense to me. Okay, thanks. For the next question, how has your literacy sponsors affected your writing identity or who you are as a writer? Literacy sponsors have definitely affected who I am today as a writer and my writing identity, because without my literacy sponsors and the teachers and parents and access I had to all sorts of literacy skills and techniques that I've learned from my teachers and literacy sponsors, I would be nowhere near the level of a writer I am today. And a lot of the writing skills and techniques I've learned have come from my literacy sponsors, and without them guiding me and showing me the right way on how to do certain things or how to interpret certain essays or how to analyze or break down certain text, I would definitely not be the level of writer I am today. Alright, last question before you leave. Is there anything else that your literacy sponsors has changed you as a writer in any way? Yeah, I would say my literacy sponsors have also gotten me to enjoy reading and writing a lot more, especially my 10th grade teacher. My 10th grade teacher made English class really fun, as like some of the other teachers I had made it a little boring or made me feel reading and writing as only as a grade, and to limit myself to do good just for the grade and to only read certain things that my teacher would assign me. And then when I got in 10th grade, and she made reading and writing really fun because she'd make like us do interactive reading with each other, and we'd actively discuss what was happening as the book would go on. And when we really discuss and think about what's going on in the book and really understand what's going on and analyze it deep down and discuss it with your peers and really analyze and decipher what's going on in the text, it really does make reading and writing so much more fun, and I have her to be thankful for that. Okay, well, thank you for answering my questions and sharing your experiences with literacy sponsor Steven, and also thank you for making time to come up here and be on the podcast. I really appreciate you making time for us today. No problem, Professor. Thank you for having me on the podcast, and thank you for everyone listening to me. And that wraps up the discussion about literacy sponsors. I want to thank everyone for tuning into today's podcast, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. And remember, read a little bit before you go to bed.